When I was 20, a few years ago, I kept having dreams about a woman with long black hair named Aurora. They were different dreams, but for some reason, her distinct face and name always ended up in them. And it got to the point where I would wake up frustrated and confused, trying to Google her name or to find out how I was connected to her. After a few months, she stopped showing up, and so I dismissed it, just thinking my brain was being a scumbag. Fast forward a few years later, Halloween 2009. I'm in the car with a friend, stopped at a gas station. I'm about to pull out and merge onto the highway when I get a phone call from a random number. So, I stopped the car, but no one answered. There was a person behind me who grew impatient, honked at me, and then swerved in front of me instead of just waiting for 2 seconds for me to move. And the second they get on the highway, some silver Civic loses control and crashes into the car that swerved in front of me. I called the cops and waited at the gas station for them to come. It turns out that drivers of both cars had died. It 100% would have been me had I not gotten that phone call. So I called it back a few hours later, out of gratitude and curiosity. I rang 3 times, and then it went to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Aurora. Please leave your name and number." I've never had goosebumps like that in my life. I called the number the next day. Because I was confused about the whole situation, some woman answers and we get talking. I tell her my entire story, including the dreams that I had. She tells me she doesn't know how I got her number and that she hasn't ever called me as far as she remembers. I ask her if she has Facebook to confirm if she is in fact the woman in my dreams. I check out her Facebook, and holy shit, it's her. This happened to me in 3rd grade, and it scared me so much I started crying, and I had to go to the office to talk to the principal about it. I was in the hallway for misbehaving, and my neighbour Tad, a year younger than me, came walking out of a class to my right, passed in front of me, and headed down the stairs. We said hi to each other, and around 20 seconds later, he walked out of the same class, passed in front of me, and headed down the stairs. I just stared at him, confused and afraid, and he looked back, as if to say, "Why are you looking at me like that?" I never realised how much it was like Matrix déjà vu. I got my wisdom teeth out in 2000, right about the time that the original Matrix came out on VHS. I was bombed completely out of my mind on Percocet after coming back from surgery, and my mom just basically dropped me in bed and rented the movie for me because I'd never seen it in theatres. I remember being irritated that the sun through the window was making the TV glare, but being too out of it to get up. A little bit after the black cat glitch in the Matrix scene, I passed out, apparently slept for around 8 hours. And the tape in the VHS machine kept rewinding itself and playing over and over again. I woke up and the movie was roughly at the same spot as when I passed out, but I was completely dark outside. 0 time lapse for me. I completely lost my mind, started freaking out and screaming because I thought I had discovered the secret and somebody had turned off the sun. I remember crying and trying to explain to my panicked family, who have never let me live it down to this day. My dad had this little toy monkey that he used to call his favourite child, and tease me and my siblings with it. Not in a bad way, but it was really frustrating to us, and we spent hours trying to steal it from him. And well anyways, one day we finally got it and threw it into the garbage after drawing on it, and my dad laughed and searched for it, but basically figured we had thrown it out and gave it up after a week or so. Anyways, fast forward a few years later, when I was around 17, I'm walking down the street in Toronto. and I see this little orange object on the side of the road, and when I walk over to it, I pick it up to see that it's the exact same monkey. It even had black Sharpie lines on it. I honestly cannot come up with the chances of that happening, especially considering our garbage is sent to a local dump and is nowhere near Toronto. I was a satellite installer, and I was driving between two small towns in North Carolina, Statesville and Taylorsville. It's about a 20-minute drive of perfectly straight 2-lane road with pretty much nothing but trees on either side. It's the middle of the day and I'm driving along listening to Howard Stern on Sirius when all of a sudden I go from wide awake to falling asleep. Meaning, 1 second I'm normal, and a second later my head is drooping down and eyes are closing. And what snaps me out of it is my car bounces like I just hit a speed bump, but I'm still in the middle of the road. Howard Stern is still in the same sentence, but my GPS signal says it's lost. And then I hear recalculating. And when it comes back, I realise I'm about 12 miles further down the road than I was, and I had missed my turn by 5 miles. My immediate thought, even though I consider myself a level-headed atheist, was that I had fallen asleep and hit a tree and died, and was now in some kind of weird afterlife. It was such a strong feeling that I drove to the nearest gas station, got out, headed inside with a sweaty palms feeling that the cashier inside was not going to be able to see me. But to my relief she did, and I bought a Red Bull. I still think I was hypnotised by the road, and drove on some kind of weird autopilot for a while, but losing GPS signal and not missing any of Howard Stern is explainable to me. I even used the Sirius ability to rewind, and there was none of that show that I had missed. And in case you're wondering, my butthole felt fine. I used to work in a building that had 3 levels of sub-basements, with the piece of lab equipment I typically worked on being in the lowest basement. I had the only key, and there was a weird phone in there, and I did work late some nights, but not this night. I was sleeping alone in my apartment when I woke up to a call on my cell phone from my girlfriend at around 3 AM. She was in hysterics and asking why I scared her. Apparently, she received a call from that basement phone just a minute earlier, with someone who sounded like me slowly repeating her name until crackling and fading out. My apartment was 10 miles away from work. I thought she was lying, but I saw the 3 AM call from the basement phone logged on her. This still freaks me out to this day. This happened a few years ago. I can't remember the occasion, but my mother and I had gone to A&W for lunch, and we were both sitting there eating our meals. We happened to be seated pretty close to the washroom doors, so I noticed everyone going in and out. The first person to come out is this old man who's kind of hobbling along. He walked past and I look at him and went on with my meal. Not 30 seconds later, another man comes out of the bathroom, and at this point I get a little freaked out because I realise he's the exact same person. Same limp, clothing, face, everything. A couple of minutes later, the same thing happens, except it's an old woman this time. She comes out and then 30 seconds later comes right out of the bathroom again. My mum took a look at me and said, "You look like you've seen a ghost." I just kind of stammered, but I just wrote it off as me being crazy. This is the single strangest occurrence of my life, and this happened when I was around 9 years old, but I can still remember it vividly. We were visiting family in Nevada with my father, and they lived out in a very dry area in a fairly good sized trailer. A couple of days in, I was playing outside with my cousin, pretty much just messing around in the dirt. And at some point I look up, and right next to the house is, I'd say, some kind of field, surrounded by a wire fence, probably originally for livestock. But anyway, there's this guy standing there, and this is a good 300 or more feet away, so I can't really see him clearly. But this is where it gets weird. As soon as I look at the guy, I have what I can only describe as an out-of-body experience. My body pretty much just went into lockdown, and I was no longer seeing through my eyes. And I wasn't just floating there or anything. I was in that man's body. Through his eyes, I could see two little shapes playing across the field. But I could just feel that he saw the shapes as animals. And then I realise he's holding a fucking shotgun. After that, I regained my body and blurted out, "We have to go inside," offering no explanation to my cousin, who was thinking at that point that I had completely lost my mind. I didn't tell anyone, because I just didn't know how to express it to other people back then. I've only since then told my brothers, but I don't think that they believed me. It still freaks me out when I think about it today, because it's the only time I've ever fully lost control of my body. It was almost like a dream, but the whole thing felt like it was happening in slow motion.